Dear colleagues, for my second speech, I've decided to talk about something a little bit more fun, a little bit less heavy. I'm going to be talking about a cultural icon, a newspaper cover star, a bit of a Trojan horse, a migrant, or maybe a refugee, and a beloved protagonist of an international bestseller. I'm going to be talking about Paddington Bear. Here he is. So the Paddington Bear books first came out in the UK in 1958. Now there are 20 books in total, and they're absolute bestsellers. They've beaten records in terms of the number of editions sold to not just children, mind you. They've been translated into 30 languages, and more than 30 million copies have been sold all over the world. So these books were written by Michael Bond. And I'm just going to go over the synopsis before looking into the stir that these books have created recently. So Paddington is a friendly bear from Peru, and he turns up in London one day. He was sent from Peru to London by his Aunt Lucy, and he's effectively a stowaway. He gets to London in a boat illegally. And so he turns up in London with his old hat and his battered suitcase, wearing a little duffel coat, and he has a marmalade sandwich in his suitcase, which might seem like a really unusual thing, but it turns out that this bear is obsessed with marmalade sandwiches, oddly enough. Anyway, he's a very lovable bear. He's very kind, he's very polite, he's very curious about everything, but he ends up getting into a lot of scrapes. He's very innocent, but he ends up getting into a lot of scrapes. But he's very kind-hearted. So to cut a long story short, he puts a note on his coat at London Paddington Station saying, "Please look after this bear, thank you very much." And he's at London Paddington Station waiting for someone to pick him up and look after him. And he comes across the Brown family. And the Brown family then adopt him, give him their name, and then all of the rest of the books are about the adventures that he goes on with the Brown family, with particularly the two children from this family. And he gets into a lot of scrapes, but the family falls in love with him, and they make him their own, they adopt him and love him. But the bear encounters a lot of hostility and skepticism on the part of the Brown family's neighbours and on the part of many of their friends. He encounters a lot of hostility. They're not sure about having a bear around. They're worried that he might steal things. He looks different. And so they're not really very sure that they even want him around. And they keep telling the Brown family that they shouldn't adopt him, or that they should send him back to Peru. And recently, various film adaptations of these books have come out, not just in the UK, they've premiered all over the world. They have become very, very popular. And recently, these films have really put the Paddington Bear books back on the map. And I'm now going to be talking about the real stir that these books and films have created, mainly in the UK, but also elsewhere as well. What's interesting about these books is that this story is not a superficial tale. These books have actually prompted conversations in classrooms about immigration and about the refugee crisis. And you might kind of say that Paddington is acting like a cute, furry Trojan bear in a way, because he's getting children to really engage with issues like immigration and the refugee crisis. What's really interesting is that Paddington was announced as a UNICEF ambassador. I'm not actually joking. Paddington Bear has actually become the poster child of the Outright campaign. And it's a campaign led by the United Nations, which teaches children in the UK about their rights. And the idea is to empower them to speak up in support of other children who don't have a voice, who are vulnerable and marginalized. Not only that, but in 2009, Michael Bond and his cute mascot kicked off a campaign to end the arrest and the detention of hundreds of child asylum seekers who were living in prison-like conditions in the UK. So this call to action was basically in response to reports that the UK Border Agency was arresting and holding up to 2,000 refugee children in really poor conditions, appalling conditions, not even poor conditions, appalling conditions. So it's really easy here to see the parallels between the issue of immigration, the issue of the refugee crisis on the one hand, and the Paddington Bear story on the other. I mean, after all, we are living in a time where millions of children are being forced to leave their homes and put their trust in the kindness of strangers. And that's like Paddington. Paddington had to leave his home in Peru and come to a new country, not knowing anyone. Obviously, Paddington looks, well, in the books, he looks different to everyone else because he's a bear. And then he finds a new family, and that story really resonates with people, and it's used to tell the story of the refugee crisis to children. But Paddington, the creation of Paddington as a figure came out of a certain kind of war trauma. And the reason for that was that Bond lived through the Second World War, and it really marked him. He saw film reels of Nazis moving people out of their homes. He saw film reels of Jewish refugees as well. And he actually saw the evacuation process with his own eyes. He saw children being evacuated out of London during the Blitz in order to try and find safety in the countryside in the UK. And Bond actually said that it was those memories, it was the memories of those newsreels showing trainloads of child evacuees leaving London with labels around their necks and possessions in small suitcases that prompted him to create the figure of Paddington Bear. So the war really transformed Michael Bond, and it really sort of pushed back the borders of his vision of the world. But Paddington as a figure is so important because Paddington, he symbolizes all those memories that Michael Bond had of the trauma of World War II. I mean, after all, Paddington takes a boat illegally to get to London. He's effectively a stowaway. And the Brown family are constantly scared that he's going to get arrested and sent back to Peru. So the book deals with issues of precariousness as well. The whole question is, won't he be allowed to stay in England? And what's really interesting is the effect that these books and films have had, because this book is now taught in primary schools. It is part of the national curriculum. It's taught in primary schools in the UK. It's read to children of primary school age up and down the country, and probably in other countries as well. And teachers are actually organising classroom activities which get these children to talk about attitudes to immigration and refugees and anything related to those aforementioned issues. But Paddington really represents an other. He represents the other in a way. And these books are a really good and fun way to introduce children to the concept of the other. There are activities, for example, going on in classrooms, which try and get children to see that when you talk about people in an abstract sense, it's so easy to see them as a threat. It's so easy to see them as different. But actually, once you get to know their story, you start to relate to them. And that's what these books and films have prompted up and down the country. But something which I particularly find satisfaction in is that the Paddington Bear stories are also riling Brexiteers. And I love anything that annoys Brexiteers. So the new Paddington Bear film hit London just as pre-Brexit antipathy towards immigration was ratcheting up. And there was one really hilarious review of the Paddington Bear film, which was entitled, and I quote, "Why Paddington is anti-UKIP propaganda." I just think that's really funny. Anyway, another immigration lawyer actually reviewed the Paddington Bear film, and he concluded, and I quote, "I would assess Paddington's prospects of success before an immigration judge as virtually zero." So I find it really ironic because these comments are not too far off the comments made in the book by certain characters who can't look past the fact that Paddington just looks different. They can't look past that, and they aren't prepared to relate to him. So in a way, Michael Bond is sort of laughing, if you like, at these very prejudiced and bigoted people. But aside from those very negative reviews, obviously others have responded much more positively. For example, in Sheffield, a group of mums got together to raise money for refugees, and that's how Project Paddington was born. And Project Paddington actually is an initiative which involves delivering teddy bears to children in places like Iraq, Lebanon and Jordan, along with messages of hope. And these mums also raise a lot of money for refugees in those countries. So I think so far 25,000 teddy bears have been sent to places like Iraq and Lebanon and Jordan. And these mums have raised thousands for displaced children around the world. So they've raised thousands and thousands of pounds. But in an era of Brexit, in an era of countries toughening their immigration policies, I think the story of Paddington, as simple and even childish as it may seem, is actually more pertinent and powerful than ever. And we're really seeing this at the moment in classrooms in the UK, but also elsewhere. Yes, for the first time, well, I don't know whether it is for the first time, but certainly for the first time in a long time, we're seeing children of primary school age engaging with these questions and seeing these stories as a reflection of the world around them. Paddington, I think, is an excellent conduit for learning about both history, so elements of World War II and the evacuations, and the present with the refugee crisis. I think these stories can also help children understand things like compassion, because in the story you're presented with a family that offers to care for a lonely, lost bear who has nothing effectively and who can't give them anything back in return. But Paddington also defies stereotypes, because the term bearish in English means negative or gruff or bothersome. And even that's often sometimes how immigrants are portrayed. They're often portrayed as a burden. They're often portrayed as something bothersome. But Paddington is the opposite of that. Paddington in the books and the films is an absolute joy to be around, and he's very popular. So in conclusion, I would say it's very, very rare that a piece of literature, especially a piece of children's literature, has such a big impact and prompts discussions like this in classrooms and even outside of classrooms as well. So I think it's really reassuring to see that a very seminal piece of children's literature is helping both children and adults to engage with a very pressing and important issue. And it's teaching them to really break down boundaries between them and the so-called other. And it's getting them to rejoice in the fact that we are indeed united in our diversity. So yeah, that's the end of my speech, but I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you for listening.